My own son handed me forged psychiatric commitment papers while I was enjoying breakfast at what I believed was a luxury spa in Barcelona. I smiled, signed them with a dramatic flourish, and 2 hours later, I was locked inside a mental institution in a foreign country. But Brandon made one crucial mistake when it came to his dear old mother. I didn't survive 30 years of marriage to his manipulative father without learning a few tricks of my own. Comment your city below and subscribe so we can stay connected. Now, let me take you back and explain how a perfectly planned mother-son bonding trip became the most expensive mistake my children would ever make. 3 weeks earlier, I was just Margaret Harrison, a recent widow, sitting alone in my living room in Phoenix, wondering what I was supposed to do with the rest of my life. That's when Brandon showed up with his wife, Amber, all smiles, all concerned about how I needed a change of scenery after Dad's funeral. Thoughtful of them to suggest an electric trip to Spain. I should have known something was wrong the moment Amber volunteered to help me pack. "Mom, you're going to love this place," Brandon said, squeezing my hand as our taxi pulled up in front of a building that looked suspiciously like a medical facility disguised as a resort. The Serenity Wellness Center specializes in helping people your age transition into the next chapter of life. Their next chapter at 62, I was already being written off, as if my story was nearly over. The irony wasn't lost on me. My children thought I needed help transitioning, when in reality, they were the ones about to need all the help they could get. The place itself was stunning. I'll give them that. White stone walls, immaculate gardens, a fountain in the courtyard. Everything looked expensive, polished, and reassuring, the kind of place that makes you feel safe and cared for, right up until you realize you've been trapped. "Mrs. Harrison, welcome," said Dr. Martinez, a thin man in an expensive suit who appeared the moment we walked through the doors. "We've been expecting you." Of course they had. My son had been planning this for months, probably from the moment Dad's will was read and he learned that I had inherited everything, all $2.3 million, the house, the life insurance, a powerful motivator for sudden filial devotion. "The grounds are beautiful," I said to Dr. Martinez. "Because what else do you say when you're being led like a lamb to slaughter?" "How long has this facility been operating?" "Oh, we've been helping families like yours for many years," he replied smoothly. "Transitions can be difficult, but we make them as comfortable as possible." Amber linked her arm through mine, playing the role of the devoted daughter. "We researched dozens of places, Mom Margaret," she said. "This one has the best reputation for people dealing with adjustments. Adjustments." There was that word again. I was starting to hate it almost as much as I was starting to hate them. They showed me to my room. It was spacious and pleasant, with a beautiful view of the gardens. Amber helped me unpack while Brandon spoke quietly with Dr. Martinez in the hallway. Through the thin walls, I caught fragments of their conversation. "The paperwork is all in order. American consulate. Temporary guardianship. Medical necessity." Medical necessity. A woman who had just buried her husband of 30 years but was otherwise perfectly healthy. I felt my blood pressure rise, but I kept my face calm, pleasant. Let them think their plan was unfolding perfectly. "Mom, we hate to leave you here alone," Brandon said when they came back into the room, "but Amber and I need to take care of some business in Madrid. We'll be back in a few days to check on you." "Take your time," I said sweetly. "I'm sure I'll be just fine here." Oh, I was going to be more than fine. I was going to be spectacular. But first, I needed to understand exactly what game they were playing and how deep this betrayal went. As I watched their taxi disappear down the tree-lined drive, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure, focused anger, and strangely enough, it felt wonderful. That evening at dinner, I started talking with the other guests. What I learned made my blood run cold. This wasn't a wellness center. It was a private psychiatric facility that specialized in difficult family situations. Half the people there had been committed by relatives who stood to inherit from them. The other half were genuinely ill and had no idea what was happening around them. "How long have you been here?" I asked Alina, a woman about my age who spoke English with a slight accent. 8 months, she said quietly. "My daughter says I need treatment for dementia, but I remember everything perfectly. I just can't prove it because they control all communication with the outside world." 8 months. I felt sick as the truth settled in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan, and now I knew exactly what my children had intended to do to me. But I felt something else, too. Determination. Whatever papers they had forced me to sign, whatever lies they had told about my mental state, I was getting out of that place. And when I did, they were going to learn exactly how clear-headed their mother truly was. The next morning brought my first real glimpse of what Brandon and Amber had arranged for me. At exactly 7 a.m., Dr. Martinez appeared at my door with a cheerful smile and a clipboard stacked with documents. Double quotes, Mrs. Harrison. We need to complete your intake evaluation today. Just some standard paperwork so we can provide the best possible care. I scanned the forms: commitment, authorization, treatment, consent, financial power of attorney transfer. My son hadn't just had me locked away. He had been laying the groundwork to take control of my entire estate while I sat behind locked doors. Double quotes, Dr. Martinez, I said, slipping into my most confused tone. I'm afraid my reading glasses are broken. Could you please tell me what these papers say? I trust you completely. His smile turned patronizing. Of course, Mrs. Harrison. These are simply formalities. Your son explained that you've been having some memory issues since your husband's passing. These documents ensure he can manage your financial affairs while you focus on your recovery. Memory issues. The only thing I couldn't remember was raising a son capable of this level of betrayal. Signed everything with a deliberately shaky hand, playing the role of a grieving, disoriented widow. But as my pen moved across the page, my mind stayed razor-sharp. I memorized the legal language, the witness signatures, the stamps, the seals. If the documents were forged, I'd need proof. If they were legal, I needed to understand exactly how my rights had been stripped away. After the paperwork, Dr. Martinez introduced me to my so-called treatment team, a psychiatrist who didn't speak English well enough to conduct a proper evaluation, a social worker who had clearly never met me, yet carried detailed notes about my supposed mental decline, a nurse who watched me as if I might become violent at any moment. Mrs. Harrison has been experiencing significant cognitive decline. Dr. Vega, the psychiatrist, read from the file. According to her family, she has shown increasing paranoia, memory loss, and an inability to manage daily tasks. I sat quietly while they listed my fabricated symptoms. Paranoid delusions about family members stealing from her, forgetting to pay bills, getting lost while driving, speaking to her deceased husband as if he was still alive. Every word was a lie, but not random lies. These were specific, detailed, carefully crafted lies. Lies that could only come from someone who knew me well and had spent real time thinking about how to destroy my credibility. My own son had created a fictional version of my mental state, convincing enough to fool medical professionals. We'll start you on a mild sedative, Dr. Vega continued, to help with the anxiety and confusion. Many patients find it helps them adjust to their new living situation. Sedatives, of course, keep the inconvenient mother drugged and compliant while her devoted children emptied her bank accounts. I nodded and smiled, but inside I was already calculating. How long before the drugs made me genuinely impaired? How quickly could I get a message to the outside world? How many laws were being broken here? And most importantly, could I prove it? That afternoon, during what they called therapeutic recreation time, I made my first ally. Maria Santos was a janitor who had worked at the facility for 6 years. She spoke excellent English and supported a daughter back home in Mexico with her salary. Mrs. Harrison, she said softly, while mopping near where I sat reading, you don't seem like the others. I looked up carefully and met her gaze. What do you mean? The ones whose families bring them here, she said quietly. They're usually different, confused. You seem very aware of everything. Maria was taking a risk by speaking to me. Staff weren't supposed to question patient commitments, but something about my situation unsettled her and I needed to know what she knew. Maria, I asked gently, in your experience, how often do patients leave this place? Her expression darkened. The ones with dementia? Never. The ones whose families pay for long-term care? Almost never. Then she glanced around to make sure no one was watching. But you should know something, she whispered. Dr. Martinez received a very large payment from your son, much more than the usual fees. A very large payment. So this wasn't just about getting me out of the way. It was about making sure I stayed out of the way, permanently. My children hadn't just betrayed me. They had bought my disappearance. But they had made one critical mistake. They underestimated how sharp their target really was. By the third day, I had the facility's entire routine memorized and a plan beginning to take shape. Morning medications were administered at exactly 8 a.m. I had been hiding under my tongue and quietly spitting out later. And that was only the beginning. Therapy sessions were scheduled for 10 a.m., where I made sure to appear increasingly confused so the staff would believe the medication was working. Lunch came at noon, when most of the security guards went on break. Afternoon recreation time was at 2 p.m., when Maria worked the second floor near the administrative offices. The keycard system was sophisticated but not foolproof. Each staff member carried an access card that opened specific doors based on their clearance level. Dr. Martinez could go anywhere. Nurses could enter patient areas and medical offices. Maintenance staff like Maria could access almost everything, except the main administrative wing. Almost. There was one door that didn't require a key card at all: the emergency exit in the laundry room. I discovered it my first night, when sleep wouldn't come, and I wandered the halls. The door was alarmed, but it was the kind of system that could be bypassed if you knew what you were doing, and thanks to 35 years married to an engineer who loved explaining security systems, I knew exactly what to do. The real problem wasn't getting out of the building, it was getting to the American consulate in Barcelona, with proof of what had been done to me. I needed the commitment papers, the financial documents, evidence of the payments Brandon had made. Without proof, I'd just be another confused, elderly woman making wild accusations about her devoted family. That's where Maria became invaluable. "The papers you signed," she whispered during our third careful conversation. "Dr. Martinez keeps copies in his office, correspondence from families, payment records, everything." "How do you know that?" I asked. "Because I clean his office," she replied, "and because I've been watching this place destroy families for 6 years. Some of us who work here, we see what really happens." Maria wasn't alone. There was an entire informal network of janitors, kitchen workers, and lower-level nurses who had witnessed too many suspicious commitments to believe they were all legitimate. They just had never had anyone with the resources or the determinations to fight back. "If I could get into that office," I said carefully, "would you help me?" Maria went quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Harrison, if you're caught trying to escape, they'll move you to the secure wing," she said finally. "Patients in the secure wing never leave." "Then I won't get caught." That night, while the facility slept under minimal staffing, I put my plan into motion. The laundry room was on the ground floor, accessible through a service corridor behind the kitchen. At 2 a.m., the night shift consisted of only 3 guards, one at the main entrance, one making rounds, and one monitoring the security cameras from the central station. The camera station was the weak point. Guards rotated every 4 hours, and during shift change there was always a 15-minute window while the incoming guards settled in and reviewed incident reports. I had timed it precisely over 3 consecutive nights. I disabled the emergency door alarm using my late husband's favorite trigger, small piece of electrical tape placed over the magnetic contact. As long as the tape stayed in place, the system read the door as closed even when it was open. Simple, effective, nearly invisible unless someone was actively searching for it. Getting back in would be harder, but I already had that solved. Maria had agreed to unlock a small ground floor window in the recreation room at 6 a.m., just before her shift ended. It was partially hidden by landscaping and out of view of the main security cameras. The walk to the road was longer than it looked from my room window, but at 3 a.m., there was no traffic and no one around to notice me. I'd changed into the darkest clothes. I'd brought navy slacks and a black sweater, anything that would help me blend into the shadows. 40 minutes later, I was standing outside a 24-hour internet cafe in the small town near the facility. My credit card still worked. Apparently, Brandon hadn't frozen my accounts yet. Overconfidence on his part. He must have assumed I'd be too drugged and confused to cause any trouble for weeks. It was time to prove him wrong. I spent the next 3 hours researching Spanish commitment laws, locating the nearest American consulate, and most importantly finding a lawyer in Barcelona who specialized in international legal disputes involving American citizens. Dr. Carmen Ruiz stood out immediately. She had handled multiple cases involving questionable psychiatric commitments and had a reputation for taking on institutions that preyed on vulnerable patients. By 6 a.m., I was back inside the facility, in my room, pretending to sleep. When the morning medication round began, I dutifully swallowed my pills and spat them out the moment the nurse left. During her morning rounds, Maria found the electrical tape on the emergency door and disposed of it without a word. Everything was back in place. And no one suspected a thing. As far as anyone at the facility knew, I had never left the building. But in reality, I had left a trail of digital breadcrumbs that were already making their way to some very interested parties, both in Barcelona and back in Phoenix. My children believed they had silenced me by locking me away. Instead, they had handed me exactly the motivation I needed to expose their entire scheme. By Thursday morning, Dr. Carmen Ruiz arrived at the Serenity Wellness Center, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents and wearing an expression that could freeze hell itself. From my window, I watched her park her car and stride toward the main entrance with absolute purpose. My late-night emails had done precisely what I'd hoped. Dr. Ruiz had contacted the American consulate, which immediately demanded a wellness check on an American citizen who had reported being illegally committed. Spanish authorities now had serious questions about the facility's documentation, and most importantly, Brandon and Amber were about to receive a very unpleasant surprise. "Mrs. Harrison," Dr. Martinez said when he appeared at my door, looking noticeably unsettled. "You have visitors. Legal visitors." I put on my most confused expression. "Legal? Did I do something wrong?" I can't remember." No, Mrs. Harrison," he said quickly. "These are advocates. They want to speak with you about your stay here." Dr. Ruiz was everything I had hoped. Foresharp, methodical, and absolutely furious about what she had already uncovered during her preliminary investigation. "Mrs. Harrison," she said once we were seated in the visitor room, "I need to ask you some very direct questions. Are you being held here against your will?" I think my son brought me here for my own good," I said carefully, maintaining my act while Dr. Martinez lingered nearby. "I've been having some memory problems since my husband died." "I see," she said calmly. "And do you remember signing any legal documents when you arrived?" "Documents?" I frowned. "Oh yes, Dr. Martinez had me sign some papers, but I couldn't read them very well. My glasses are broken." I gestured helplessly. Dr. Ruiz took notes, but I saw the recognition in her eyes. She knew exactly what I was doing, playing the part while feeding her everything she needed. "Mrs. Harrison," she continued, "would you like me to help you contact your family to discuss your care?" "Oh, that would be wonderful," I said brightly. "My son Brandon is in Madrid on business. He and his wife Amber are such good children to arrange this lovely place for me." More notes. Dr. Ruiz was building her case, and every compliant, confused answer I gave strengthened it. Under Spanish law, the more mentally incompetent I appeared, the more illegal my commitment became. After Dr. Ruiz left, everything moved quickly by afternoon. Spanish social services arrived to conduct their own evaluation. By evening, a representative from the American consulate interviewed me, and somewhere in Madrid, my children were receiving frantic calls from lawyers they had never heard of. But the real shock came the next morning. "Mom," Brandon's voice crackled through the facility phone, tight with panic. "I just got a call from some Spanish lawyer. She says there are questions about your commitment papers." "Oh, Brandon, sweetheart," I said, layering confusion and distress into my voice. "I'm so sorry if I caused any trouble. I don't remember talking to any lawyers. The doctors here say my memory isn't very good anymore." "Mom, listen to me very carefully," he said urgently. "If anyone asks you questions, just tell them you're happy there and getting good care. Can you do that for me?" "Of course, dear," I replied. "But Brandon, when are you coming to visit? I miss you." "We'll be there tomorrow. Just don't sign anything else, okay? And don't talk to any more lawyers unless I'm there." After I hung up, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Brandon was panicking, which meant his lawyers had already told him exactly how much trouble he was in. International kidnapping, false imprisonment, elder abuse, fraud. The list of potential charges was impressive, but I wasn't finished. My children had tried to erase me from my own life, and they were about to learn that Margaret Harrison did not erase easily. That evening, Maria brought me something that made my victory feel complete. Photocopies from Dr. Martinez's office. Payment. Records showing Brandon had transferred $50,000 to the facility. Correspondence discussing long-term care options for patients whose families wanted permanent placement. And most damning of all, a psychiatric evaluation, documenting my supposed mental decline. The evaluation was dated 3 days before I had even left Phoenix, an impressive feat, considering I had never been examined by a psychiatrist in my life. Brandon had paid for forged medical documents to justify my illegal commitment. He had bribed a foreign facility to hold me indefinitely, And he had done it all while presenting himself as a loving son, concerned about his mother's well-being. The mask was off. And now, the consequences were just beginning. Tomorrow, when Brandon and Amber arrived for their visit, they would be walking straight into a trap. The Spanish authorities would be waiting, the American consulate would have questions, and their confused, helpless mother would suddenly become very clear about exactly what had been done to her. But the real shock would come later when they returned to Phoenix and discovered what I had accomplished during my supposedly helpless weeks locked away in Spain. Brandon and Amber arrived at the facility Friday morning looking exhausted, like they hadn't slept in days. Good. I, on the other hand, had been sleeping beautifully even without the sedatives they thought I'd been taking. It's amazing how well you rest when you know justice is finally on its way. Mrs. Harrison, Dr. Martinez said, ushering them into the visiting room where I was waiting. Your son and daughter-in-law are here to see you. I looked up with the foggy expression of someone whose medication had blurred the world around her. Brandon, oh sweetheart, you came back, I said softly. I was so worried I'd done something wrong. The doctors keep asking me questions, and I can't remember the answers. Brandon shot a sharp glance at Dr. Martinez. What kind of questions? Oh, about why I'm here, I said slowly, pressing my hand to my forehead for effect. Who brought me, whether I want to stay. It's all very confusing. I told them you know what's best for me. Amber squeezed my hand, her smile warm and completely fake. Mom, Margaret, who haven't signed any more papers, have you? Sometimes places like this try to get patients to sign things they don't understand. I don't think so, dear, I replied, although that nice lawyer lady did ask me to sign something yesterday, but I told her I couldn't see clearly without my glasses. The color drained from Brandon's face. What lawyer? Before I could answer, Dr. Carmen Ruiz entered the room accompanied by 2 Spanish officials and a representative from the American consulate. Mr. Harrison, Dr. Ruiz said crisply, I'm Carmen Ruiz, representing your mother in matters related to her commitment to this facility. We need to discuss several irregularities in the documentation you provided. Brandon stood slowly, his lawyer instincts kicking in even as his face went pale. I'm not sure what you mean. My mother agreed to treatment here. We have all the proper paperwork. Yes, Dr. Ruiz said, opening her briefcase. Let's talk about that paperwork. She pulled out a thick stack of documents. Specifically, the psychiatric evaluation dated 3 days before your mother left the United States, the one allegedly conducted by Dr. James Morrison of Phoenix General Hospital. She looked Brandon directly in the eye. Dr. Morrison has never met your mother. In fact, he was attending a medical conference in Seattle on the dates listed in this evaluation. Amber's hand tightened around mine, her nails digging into my skin. Amber, dear, I said softly, looking at her with wide, confused eyes, you're hurting me. We also have questions about the financial arrangements, the consulate representative added, specifically, the $50,000 payment made to this facility prior to your mother's admission. That amount is far above standard fees for the level of care provided. Brandon was sweating now. I wanted to make sure my mom received the best possible treatment. Money wasn't an issue. How generous, Dr. Ruiz said dryly, and the power of attorney documents granting you control over her assets while she was institutionalized. Standard precautions, Brandon replied. Mom has been showing signs of cognitive decline since Dad's death. Someone needed to manage her finances. That was when I decided to drop the act. Actually, Brandon, I said, my voice suddenly steady and clear. Someone has been managing my finances, but it wasn't cognitive decline that required it. The room went completely silent. Brandon stared at me, like I'd just risen from the dead. Mom, Amber whispered. I've been fully aware of everything that's been happening here, I continued calmly. The forged medical records, the illegal commitment, the plan to keep me locked away while you emptied my bank accounts. I smiled at both of them. What you didn't count on was, this your mother isn't nearly as helpless as you thought. Brandon finally found his voice. You've been faking this the whole time. Oh, sweetheart, I said gently. I haven't been faking anything. I really was confused. Confused about how I could have raised a son capable of this level of betrayal. Dr. Ruiz was writing furiously now. The Spanish officials were speaking quietly into their radios, and for the first time in their adult lives, my children were truly seeing their mother. But here's what's really going to confuse you, I went on. While you've been congratulating yourselves on your clever little scheme, I've been busy making a few arrangements of my own. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. One, they thought I was too confused to use properly. I had a lovely conversation with my lawyer in Phoenix yesterday. It turns out that trying to have someone falsely committed for financial gain is classified as elder abuse under Arizona law, and the penalties are severe. Amber was crying, now real tears this time, not the practiced ones she'd used to manipulate me for years. Your house is currently being searched by investigators, I continued calmly. Your financial records are being audited, and your attempt to access my bank accounts while I was supposedly incapacitated triggered some very interesting fraud alerts. Brandon collapsed into his chair like a deflated balloon. Mum, we can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can, I said. You're both very good at explanations, very creative with the truth. I stood up, feeling stronger and clearer than I had in years. But you know what? I don't actually want to hear your explanations anymore. I turned to Dr. Ruiz. I want to press charges for false imprisonment, elder abuse, fraud, and anything else you believe applies. She gave me a tight, satisfied smile. It will be my pleasure to help you with that, Mrs. Harrison. As Brandon and Amber were escorted away by Spanish authorities, I realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in decades, I felt truly free. Free from their manipulation, free from their fake concern, free from the constant erosion of my independence. They had tried to erase Margaret Harrison from her own life. Instead, they had awakened someone they'd never met, a woman who was finished being anyone's victim, and I was only getting started. The flight back to Phoenix gave me 8 uninterrupted hours to plan my next moves. Brandon and Amber were facing extradition proceedings in Spain. But that was just the appetizer. The main course would be served once I got home and uncovered how deep their betrayal really went. My first stop wasn't my house. It was the law office of Patricia Williams, the attorney I'd hired. During that midnight research session in a Spanish internet cafe, Patricia was everything her reputation promised: sharp, meticulous, and genuinely excited to take on a case involving international elder abuse. Mrs. Harrison, she said, reviewing the files I'd compiled, what your son did constitutes multiple federal crimes, but I need to warn you, proving financial elder abuse can be complicated when family members already have legitimate access to accounts. That's exactly what I was afraid you'd say, I replied. But Patricia, I think there's more here. I leaned forward. Brandon didn't come up with this overnight. The planning, the forged documents, the coordination with an overseas facility, he had help. What kind of help? I pulled out a folder I'd assembled during the flight. His wife Amber works for Fletcher & Associates, financial planning firm. His best friend, Marcus, is a psychiatrist. His neighbor, Karen Wright, is a paralegal who specializes in elder law. I met her eyes. That's a very convenient group of professionals. Patricia's eyebrows rose. You think this was a conspiracy? I think my son assembled a team of experts to help him steal my inheritance legally, I said, and I think they've done this before. We spent the next 3 hours combing through my financial records from the past year. What we found was worse than I'd expected. Small transfers I'd never authorized, investment changes I'd never approved, and most damning of all, a new life insurance policy taken out in my name 6 months earlier. The sole beneficiary, Brandon. Margaret, Patricia said quietly, this policy includes a double indemnity clause, accidental death or death by natural causes in a foreign country. The room went cold. They hadn't just planned to steal my money while I was locked away in Spain. They had planned for me to die there. How much is the policy worth? I asked. $1.5 million. Combined with my existing assets, Brandon would have inherited more than $4 million if I had died in that facility. I leaned back in my chair, trying to absorb the truth. My son hadn't just betrayed me, he had planned my death disguised as natural causes brought on by stress and institutionalization, but murder, all the same. Patricia, I said finally, I want everything. Every person who helped him, every document they forged, every law they broke, and I want every single one of them held accountable. That will require a comprehensive investigation, she said carefully. Given the international elements, the FBI will need to be involved. Then call them. By evening, I was back in my own living room for the first time in 2 weeks, but it no longer felt like home. Everything looked the same. But knowing what had been planned here, what conversations had taken place about my future, made it feel like I was sitting inside a crime scene. My phone rang. Mrs. Harrison, said Detective Sarah Martinez from the Phoenix Police Department's Elder Abuse Unit. "We've completed our preliminary search of your son's residence. You need to see what we found." 20 minutes later, I was standing inside Brandon's home office, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. I laid out everything they'd compiled: a detailed timeline of my husband's final illness, research into accelerated inheritance procedures, and most chilling of all, a folder labeled contingency plans. Inside were 3 scenarios for what they coldly called resolving the Margaret situation. Option 1 was a Spanish facility and controlled until natural death occurred. Option 2 was having me declared incompetent and placed in a secured care facility in the United States. Option 3 was what they euphemistically referred to as medical intervention during travel. "Mrs. Harrison," Detective Martinez said gently, "we need to talk about protection arrangements for you." "If my son posted bail, he won't," I said firmly. "His passport has been confiscated, and Spanish authorities aren't releasing him until the extradition hearing. But his associates are still here, and they have just as much to lose as he does." That night, sitting in my home under police protection, I realized exposing Brandon and Amber was only the beginning. There was an entire network of people who had helped plan my disappearance, and they were still out there, probably already working on damage control. But they had made the same mistake my son had made. They had underestimated Margaret Harrison, and I was about to show them exactly how costly that miscalculation would be. Dr. Marcus Webb looked nothing like the monster I had imagined. Sitting across from me in the FBI interview room, he appeared exactly as he claimed to be: a concerned family friend who had only tried to help Brandon find appropriate care for his mentally declining mother, Mrs. Harrison. He said with practiced empathy, "I want you to know that everything I recommended was based entirely on Brandon's descriptions of your behavior. If he misled me about your condition, then I'm as much a victim here as you are." Special Agent Linda Cooper, who had been assigned to lead the conspiracy investigation, took notes while keeping a neutral expression, but I could tell she wasn't buying Marcus's innocent act any more than I was. "Dr. Webb," I said pleasantly, "could you explain how you diagnosed my condition without ever examining me?" "I didn't diagnose anything," he replied quickly. "I simply provided Brandon with general information about facilities that treat age-related cognitive decline." "General information," I repeated, "that included specific recommendations for foreign institutions specializing in long-term involuntary commitment." His composure flickered. "Brandon was concerned about privacy," he said. "He felt a domestic facility wouldn't provide the discretion your family needed." Discretion. Interesting word choice. I opened the folder Agent Cooper had given me. "Dr. Webb, are you familiar with Elena Vasquez, Thomas Chen, and Dorothy Miller?" "I don't believe so. There are 3 other patients who were committed to foreign facilities based on your recommendations over the past 2 years," I said calmly. "All of them had substantial inheritances. All of them died within 6 months of commitment." The room went silent. Marcus's lawyer, who had been quiet until then, leaned forward. "My client has no knowledge of any other cases beyond his consultation with Mr. Harrison." "That's strange," Agent Cooper said evenly, "because your phone records show 17 calls to the Serenity Wellness Center over the past 18 months. That's a lot of contact for someone who only provided general information to one family." I watched Marcus's face as the walls began to close in. This man had helped orchestrate the deaths of at least 3 other people, and he had nearly added me to that list. "There's something else," I said, pulling out another document, the life insurance policy Brandon took out on me. "The application includes a medical history that could only have come from someone with access to my actual medical records." Marcus's lawyer began scribbling furiously. "Now, Mrs. Harrison," he said sharply, "are you suggesting my client illegally accessed confidential medical information?" "I'm not suggesting it," I replied. "I'm stating it as fact. Dr. Webb accessed my records through the hospital system where he has privileges, then used that information to help Brandon create a believable medical history for the insurance application." Agent Cooper nodded. "Computer forensics confirmed that Dr. Webb accessed Mrs. Harrison's medical records 14 times in the 3 months before she left for Spain. He also accessed records for Elena Vasquez, Thomas Chen, and Dorothy Miller." The room was dead silent except for the frantic scratching of Marcus's lawyer's pen. "Dr. Webb," I continued, "how much did Brandon pay you for your expertise? Was it a flat fee, or did you receive a percentage of the inheritance?" "I think this interview is over," his lawyer said quickly. Actually, Agent Cooper replied, it's just getting started. Dr. Webb, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, insurance fraud, and computer crimes, and those are only the federal charges. As they led Marcus away in handcuffs, I felt a grim satisfaction. One down, but the investigation was uncovering far more conspirators than I had expected. Amber's boss at Fletcher and Associates had helped structure the financial transfers, and the web was still unraveling. Karen Wright had provided legal guidance on commitment procedures, and she wasn't alone. There were others, an entire network of professionals who had turned elder abuse into a lucrative side business. But the most shocking revelation came that evening, when Agent Cooper called me at home. Mrs. Harrison, we've been analyzing the financial records from all the connected cases. The money stolen from victims wasn't just split among the conspirators. Most of it went toward funding something much larger. What kind of something? I asked. A company called Golden Years Consulting. It's marketed as a service that helps families navigate care options for aging parents. But in reality, it's a highly sophisticated operation that identifies wealthy seniors, manufactures medical crises, and then profits from their institutionalization or their deaths. I sank heavily into my chair. How many victims are we talking about? So far, we've identified 12 confirmed cases over the past 3 years, she said. But we believe there could be dozens more. My son hadn't just betrayed me personally. He had been part of an enterprise that systematically targeted and destroyed elderly people across the country. People like me, people who had worked their entire lives to build something for their families, only to have that love weaponized against them. Agent Cooper, I said quietly, what can I do to help you catch all of them? Actually, Mrs. Harrison, we have a proposal for you, she replied, and it's going to require you to be braver than you've ever been before. The plan she outlined was audacious, dangerous, and exactly what I needed to ensure justice was served. Golden Years Consulting was holding its annual professional development retreat in 2 weeks. It was a gathering where they shared strategies for identifying vulnerable targets and maximizing profits from elder exploitation. We want you to attend as bait, Agent Cooper explained during our planning session. You'll pose as a wealthy recent widow looking for advice on protecting your assets from potentially greedy family members. The goal is to get them to reveal their methods on tape. So, essentially, I said, I'll be shopping for services to protect myself from people like my own son. Exactly. But Mrs. Harrison, you need to understand the risks. If they suspect you're working with us, or if they recognize you from the news coverage of Brandon's arrests, they may try to eliminate you permanently. I finished her thought. Agent Cooper, these people already planned my murder. The least I can do is help make sure they can't do this to anyone else. The retreat was being held at an exclusive resort in Scottsdale, the kind of place wealthy retirees go to spend their golden years in comfort and security. The irony wasn't lost on me that these predators had chosen a venue that symbolized everything they were destroying. I spent a week preparing for my role. Patricia Williams helped me create a convincing false identity. Eleanor Blackwood, recently widowed, inheritor of a tech fortune, and supposedly paranoid about her stepchildren's intentions. Agent Cooper's team provided sophisticated recording equipment and a detailed backstory designed to withstand scrutiny. But the most important preparation was psychological. I had to present myself as the kind of vulnerable target these people preyed upon, while staying sharp enough to outwit them. It was a delicate balance, appearing weak while remaining fully alert. The retreat attendees were exactly what I expected. Well-dressed professionals who had found a way to monetize human misery. Doctors, lawyers, financial planners, even funeral directors who specialized in expediting family transitions during difficult times. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the retreat coordinator, greeted me warmly at registration. Eleanor, I understand you're dealing with some family complications regarding your inheritance. My late husband's children have made it very clear they think I'm too old to manage significant assets, I said, injecting just the right amount of worry into my voice. I need to know what options I have to protect myself. You've come to the right place, she said smoothly. We specialize in helping people in situations exactly like yours. The presentations were chilling. Workshop titles included medical documentation for expedited competency challenges, international care facility placement, and asset protection during family transitions. Each session was essentially a step-by-step guide on how to steal from elderly people while maintaining a legal facade. During lunch, I found myself seated with 3 other clients, all wealthy widows referred by family members. What I learned from them made me feel sick. "My daughter brought me here," said Janet Morrison, a 74-year-old from Tucson. "She says I need to be more realistic about my future care needs, but honestly, I feel fine." "Same here," added Patricia Wells. "My son-in-law is very concerned about how I manage my finances. He thinks I should simplify my affairs." These women were being positioned for the same fate I had narrowly escaped. Their own families had brought them here to be evaluated not as loved ones, but as potential targets. That afternoon's session was led by Dr. Marcus Webb's replacement, to smooth-talking psychiatrist named Dr. James Morrison, who specialized in rapid cognitive assessments for time-sensitive family situations. And I knew I was about to hear exactly how lives were destroyed quickly, efficiently, and for profit. "Ladies," he told our small group, "the key to protecting yourselves is recognizing when you're no longer capable of making sound decisions. Many people resist help because they don't realize their judgment has already been compromised." He was literally teaching these women to doubt their own mental competence while quietly assessing them as potential victims. But the most damning moment came that evening, when Dr. Rebecca Chen addressed the professional attendees in what she believed was a private session. Thanks to Agent Cooper's surveillance team, I was able to listen to the entire presentation from my hotel room. "This year's client pool shows excellent potential," she said calmly, flipping through profiles of the widows they had identified. "Eleanor Blackwood, in particular, represents a high-value opportunity. Recent bereavement, substantial assets, and stepchildren who have already expressed concern about her judgment. They weren't just planning to help my fake stepchildren steal from me, they were planning to help them kill me. The Blackwood case will require our full international package," Dr. Morrison added. "Given the asset size," he continued, "we'll want to ensure complete resolution within 6 months. Complete resolution. Their polite, professional euphemism for murder. As I sat alone in my luxury hotel room, listening to these monsters calmly plan the death of my fictional identity, I understood something very clearly. Bringing down Brandon and his immediate co-conspirators hadn't been enough. Golden Years Consulting wasn't just a group of criminals, it was a machine, engineered to destroy people like me, and it had been running successfully for years. But tomorrow, that machine was going to meet its match. Because Eleanor Blackwood might have been their ideal victim, but Margaret Harrison was about to shut them down permanently. The next morning brought a development I hadn't expected. Agent Cooper called my room at 6 a.m., her voice tense. "Mrs. Harrison, we have a problem. Brandon made bail." I sat straight up in bed, instantly awake. "How is that possible?" "He's facing extradition to Spain. His lawyer filed an emergency appeal claiming medical necessity," she said. "Apparently, Amber suffered a breakdown in Spanish custody, and Brandon convinced a judge he needed to be released to arrange psychiatric care for his wife." "That's ridiculous," I snapped. "He can arrange care from jail." The judge disagreed. "Brandon has been released on a $2 million bond, with electronic monitoring and surrender of his passport." She paused. "But Mrs. Harrison, there's something else. We believe he knows about the operation." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "Someone tipped off Golden Years Consulting about our investigation. They've accelerated their schedule. Instead of spreading activities over 3 days, they're compressing everything into today. And they've added a new session specifically focused on the Eleanor Blackwood case." As I got dressed, Agent Cooper explained what that meant. Brandon's sudden release had triggered panic inside the conspiracy. They were rushing their plans, trying to neutralize the Eleanor Blackwood problem before it could threaten them. "We can extract you now," Agent Cooper said. "We already have enough evidence to prosecute the core group, but not enough to protect the other women here," I replied. "Janet, Patricia, the others, if I leave, they'll still be targeted. Mrs. Harrison, this isn't your responsibility." "Yes, it is," I said firmly. "Brandon didn't just betray me. He became part of something that's destroyed families across this country. If I can stop that, then everything I've been through will mean something." 2 hours later, I was sitting in what Golden Years Consulting called an individual assessment session, across from Dr. Morrison and financial planner David Chen. They believed they were evaluating Eleanor Blackwood's vulnerability. In reality, they were confessing on tape. Eleanor, Dr. Morrison said with practiced warmth, we've reviewed your situation, and we believe you're at significant risk from your stepchildren. They clearly see you as an obstacle to their inheritance. What kind of risk? I asked, letting fear creep into my voice. Legal challenges to your competency, he replied. Attempts to have you declared incapable of managing your own affairs. In extreme cases, they might even try to have you institutionalized. David Chen leaned forward. The good news is, we can protect you. We have arrangements with secure facilities designed specifically for people in your situation. Secure facilities, he continued. Private care centers where you'd be safe from family interference, while your assets are protected through specialized trusts. They were describing exactly what had been planned for me in Spain, a locked facility where I'd be held until death, while they stripped my estate. And how would that work financially? I asked. We'd establish a series of trusts, David explained, to protect your wealth from family challenges, while ensuring you receive excellent care for the rest of your life. And who would manage those trusts? I asked. David smiled. Our professional team would handle everything. You wouldn't need to worry about a thing. They were calmly explaining how they'd steal everything I owned while keeping me imprisoned until I died. Then Dr. Morrison said something that made my heart stop. Eleanor, he said casually, I should mention we're already familiar with your situation through a mutual acquaintance, Brandon. Harrison speaks very highly of our services. The room tilted. Brandon wasn't just a client of Golden Years Consulting. He was actively referring them new targets, even from jail. He was still trying to have me killed. Brandon Harrison, I repeated carefully, a wonderful young man who recently helped his mother transition into appropriate care. Very forward-thinking about family financial planning. They didn't know Brandon was my son. They believed Eleanor Blackwood and Margaret Harrison were two completely different people, which meant Brandon had recommended me as a target for the same fate he tried to arrange for me in Spain. I'd love to meet Mr. Harrison, I said evenly. Could you arrange an introduction? Dr. Morrison glanced at his phone. Actually, he's here at the resort today. Some legal complications with his mother's estate, but he wanted to support our mission despite his personal troubles. Brandon was here. At the same retreat where they were planning to murder his fake client. The audacity took my breath away. There's one more thing, David Chen added. Given the urgency of your stepchildren's threats, we'd recommend immediate placement. We could have you transferred to a secure facility as early as tonight. Tonight they were planning to kidnap me just as they had Janet, Patricia, and countless others. What they didn't know was that Margaret Harrison had learned a great deal about survival and strategy over the past 3 weeks. And tonight, instead of becoming their next victim, I was going to become their worst nightmare. That sounds perfect, I said, smiling gratefully. I can't tell you how relieved I am to have found people who truly understand what I'm going through. Dr. Morrison and David Chen exchanged satisfied looks. In their minds, Eleanor Blackwood had just agreed to hand over her fortune and her life. They had no idea they'd just confessed their entire operation to the FBI at 9 p.m. Everything came together in the resort's private dining room. Golden Years Consulting had arranged what they called a celebration dinner for their newest client acquisition. What they had actually arranged was their own destruction. Everyone involved in planning my fake murder was present. Dr. Morrison, David Chen, Dr. Rebecca Chen, and 3 other professionals who specialized in different aspects of elder or exploitation. And seated confidently at the head of the table was my son, Brandon. Eleanor, Brandon said as I entered the room, Rebecca tells me you're interested in our family consultation services. I looked straight into his eyes, the same brown eyes I'd gazed into when he was a baby, the eyes I'd watched flutter closed as I rocked him to sleep, whispering promises that I'd always protect him. Now those same eyes were studying me as prey. Mr. Harrison, I said pleasantly, I understand you recently helped your mother through some difficult decisions. Unfortunately, yes, he replied smoothly. My mother was suffering from severe dementia, and the family had to make some very hard choices about her care. How sad, I said softly. Is she doing well now? Brandon's expression shifted into practiced grief. Actually, she passed away last month. The stress of her condition was just too much for her system. The room fell completely silent. Even the conspirators looked stunned. Brandon had just announced my death to a room full of people who believed I was someone else entirely. "So sorry for your loss," I said gently. "It must be devastating to lose a mother." "It was a blessing, really," he replied. "She'd been suffering for so long. That's when I decided it was time to end the charade." "Brandon," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room, "that's a fascinating story, especially since your mother is sitting right here." I reached up and removed the gray wig that had completed my Eleanor Blackwood disguise. Beneath it was my own silver hair, styled exactly the way I liked it. "Son," Brandon's face drained of all color. Dr. Morrison dropped his wineglass. David Chen instinctively glanced toward the exits. "Let me introduce myself properly," I continued, standing. "I'm Margaret Harrison, Brandon's supposedly deceased mother, the woman whose murder you've all been planning." Agent Cooper's voice filled the room through hidden speakers. "This is the FBI. The building is surrounded. Nobody move." Chaos erupted. David Chen bolted for the door and ran straight into Agent Martinez. Dr. Morrison stammered about misunderstandings. Dr. Rebecca Chen began screaming about entrapment. Brandon didn't move. He just stared at me, shock, rage, and something disturbingly close to admiration flickering across his face. "How long have you known," he asked quietly, "that you were trying to have me killed since Spain? That you were part of this larger operation? Since yesterday? That you'd already told people I was dead?" "About 5 minutes ago." Agent Cooper and her team flooded the room, badges out, handcuffs ready. And just like that, the people who thought they were untouchable finally ran out of places to hide. "Brandon Harrison," she said formally, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, fraud, and violations of federal racketeering laws." As the agents placed handcuffs on my son, he turned and looked at me one last time. "You know, Mom," he said quietly, "I always underestimated you." "Yes," I replied, my voice heavy with sadness, "that was your biggest mistake." The next hour passed in a blur, arrests being made, evidence catalogued, and victims interviewed. The other widows at the retreat were shaken, but deeply grateful to learn how close they'd come to the same fate planned for me. Janet Morrison wrapped her arms around me, tears streaming down her face. "You saved our lives," she whispered. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom and watched as Brandon was sentenced to 20 years in prison for his role in what prosecutors called the most sophisticated elder abuse conspiracy in American history. Amber received 15 years. Dr. Morrison was sentenced to 20. The entire golden years. Consulting network was dismantled, its assets seized and set aside to compensate the victims. But the real victory wasn't the prison sentences or the money recovered. It was sitting in my own living room that evening, finally at peace in my own home, knowing I had not only survived my family's betrayal, but had helped make sure it could never happen to anyone else. I had started this story as a victim, a confused widow, manipulated by the very people who should have loved and protected me. But I ended it as something far more powerful. I became someone who fought back, someone who refused to disappear quietly, someone who turned her own family's cruelty into justice for dozens of other families. My phone rang. It was Agent Cooper. "Margaret," she said, "we just received word from Spain. The Serenity Wellness Center has been shut down by international authorities. They're investigating connections to similar operations across Europe." I smiled as I looked out at the garden in my backyard. Roses I had planted myself, flowers that bloomed every spring. A quiet reminder that some things grow stronger after surviving harsh seasons. "That's wonderful news, Agent Cooper. There's more," she continued. "The Victims' Compensation Fund has been approved. Between that and the civil settlements, you're expected to receive about $8 million. $8 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. But more importantly, it was justice, proof that my fight had mattered." "What will you do now?" Agent Cooper asked. I looked around my home, the house I had nearly lost, now filled with my own choices, my own memories, my own future. "I think I'll travel," I said. "There are places I always wanted to see but never had the chance. And maybe I'll write a book about everything that happened. People should know it's never too late to fight back." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my home, truly alone for the first time in decades. Not lonely alone by choice, in control of my own life, answerable to no one but myself. My children had tried to erase me from my own story. Instead, they helped me discover exactly how strong I really was. And that discovery was worth more than all the money in the world. Outside my window, my roses were blooming beautifully,